My name is Emily, I'm 29, and I found my boyfriend cheating on me with my own stepsister on my couch, in the apartment I paid for. Before I tell you how that single moment of betrayal unraveled a multi-million-dollar federal fraud case and landed them all in front of the FBI, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It helps to know I'm not alone. It all ended in a single, heart-stopping second, but the poison had been seeping into the foundations of my life for years. The final sound I heard before my world shattered wasn't a scream or a cry. It was a moan. His moan. A sound of pure, selfish pleasure echoing in the living room I had decorated, in the home I had built. I'd just gotten home early. A big client meeting for a software integration project, one I'd been leading for 6 months, had been pushed to the next morning. I was relieved. The stress had been immense, and all I wanted was a quiet night with Marcus. Maybe we could order Thai food, open a bottle of wine, and just talk. We hadn't really talked in months. The thought felt like a luxury. As I walked down the hallway toward my apartment, I could hear music. It was faint at first, a thumping bass line vibrating through the floor. As I got closer, I recognized the playlist. It was the high-energy, aggressive workout mix he'd been obsessed with lately. It seemed odd for 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, but I brushed it aside. Maybe he was just blowing off some steam. I put my key in the lock, a sense of unease starting to prickle at the back of my neck. The doors swung open, and the scene that hit me felt like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. The music was loud now, pulsing from the Sonos speakers I'd bought him for Christmas. And there, illuminated by the soft glow of the floor lamp, was my boyfriend, Marcus. He was on the gray sectional couch that I had saved for, the couch I had been so proud of. And writhing on top of him, her blonde hair fanned out across my silk pillows, was my stepsister, Vanessa. My brain just stopped. The world didn't go silent or slow down. It became intensely, painfully sharp. Every detail burned itself into my memory. The way the light caught the sweat on his back. The empty wine glasses on the floor, my wine glasses. The way Vanessa's head was thrown back in ecstasy. And worst of all, right next to them, on the coffee table they'd carelessly shoved aside, was the digital photo frame I'd just given him for our 2-year anniversary. It was cycling through pictures of us. Us smiling on a trip to Mexico. Us laughing at a Yankees game. Us, happy. A ghost of a life that was being murdered right in front of me. That was it. The photo frame. That was the switch that flipped inside my soul, from shock to something primal and cold. It wasn't sadness that flooded me. It was a white-hot, clarifying rage. A rage that burned away all the doubt, all the excuses, all the times I had let myself be gaslit and ignored. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I moved. I lunged forward, my movements silent and deadly. I wasn't a heartbroken woman, I was a predator. I grabbed a fistful of Vanessa's expensive, salon-perfect hair. She let out a surprised yelp, her eyes flying open in shock. Before she could process what was happening, I slammed her head, with all the force of my betrayal, into the screen of the 65-inch television. There was a sickening crack of plastic and glass, a flash of static, and the screen exploded into a spiderweb of black lines. She shrieked, a sound more of shock than pain, tumbling off Marcus and onto the floor. Marcus scrambled to get up, his face a mask of disbelief and panic. "Emily! What the hell?" he sputtered. I didn't answer. I met his eyes for a split second, and with a guttural roar, I shoved him with all my might. He was off balance, and he stumbled backward over the heavy oak coffee table, landing in a heap on the floor with a loud thud. I grabbed Vanessa by the arm, her skin slick with sweat, and dragged her, naked and sputtering, to the front door. "Get out of my house," I snarled. I yanked the door open and threw her out into the brightly lit public hallway. I turned back for Marcus, who was now cowering by the ruined TV. I grabbed him by the hair and hauled him to his feet. He was bigger than me, but in that moment, I was stronger. I shoved him out into the hall after her. The door to apartment 4D across the hall creaked open, and a group of college kids stared, their mouths hanging open, a mixture of shock and amusement on their faces. From 4B, my elderly neighbor Mrs. Rodriguez stepped out, her little dog yapping at her feet. Her phone was already in her hand, the red light of the camera glowing. Good. Let her record. Let the world see them for what they were. My clothes! Vanessa wailed, trying to cover herself. I walked back inside, scooped up the pile of their discarded clothing from the floor, and threw it out into the hall after them. Here's your trash, I said, my voice a low, dangerous tremor I didn't recognize as my own. Then I slammed the door, shot the deadbolt, and leaned against it, my body finally starting to shake. I stood alone in the wreckage of my living room, the thumping music still playing its stupid, triumphant beat. I didn't fall apart. I walked over to the speaker and shut it off. The silence was deafening. Then, I calmly walked to the peephole. And with my own phone, I started recording their humiliating, frantic scramble for clothes in the public hallway. Not for revenge. For evidence. In that moment, I knew this wasn't just the end of a relationship. It was the beginning of a war. How does a 29-year-old lead software engineer, a woman who designs logical systems for a living, end up in a scene of such primal chaos? It didn't happen overnight. It was a death by 1,000 cuts, a slow erosion of my self-worth that I had allowed for far too long. My mother, Linda, is a kind, gentle soul who, after my father passed away, fell for Richard. He was charismatic and successful, and she was lonely. When they married, I was 16. And with Richard came his daughter, Vanessa, a year younger than me but already an expert in the art of manipulation. From day one, the dynamic was set. I was the quiet, studious, responsible one. Vanessa was the dazzling, demanding, golden child. I remember my high school graduation. I was valedictorian. I had a full academic scholarship to a top engineering school. During my speech, I saw my mom in the front row, tears of pride streaming down her face. Richard was next to her, checking his watch. Later, at the celebration dinner, he raised a glass. To Emily, he said, with the enthusiasm of a man reading a grocery list. Now, on to more exciting news. Vanessa just made captain of the cheerleading squad. The entire family's attention swiveled to her as she preened. My academic achievement was a footnote. Her social victory was the headline. That was the pattern. My successes were quiet, expected. Hers were loud and celebrated. I poured my energy into my career, excelling in a male-dominated field, and into my relationship with Marcus. I met him at a colleague's party. He worked in marketing, and he showered me with the attention I'd never gotten from my stepfather. He made me feel like the center of the universe. When he moved into my apartment 8 months later, I was ecstatic. My salary was easily 3 times his, but I didn't care. I paid the rent, the utilities, the grocery bills. I bought him a car when his broke down. I funded his startup ideas that never went anywhere. I thought I was investing in our future, in our partnership. I was too blind to see I was just his sponsor. I remember one night, I was working late on a complex coding problem for my job, a project that would eventually lead to a major promotion and a significant salary increase. Marcus came in, sighing dramatically. Still staring at that boring code, he said, peering over my shoulder. I don't know how you do it. He said it like a compliment, but the undertone was clear. My work was nerdy and incomprehensible, while his world of marketing and schmoozing was exciting and important. He then asked if I could transfer him $500 for a networking dinner. I did it without a second thought. I was earning the money, he was living the life. The beginning of the end came, as it so often does, from a place of insecurity, his, not mine. He attended a college friend's lavish wedding in the Hamptons. The groom was some tech bro who had just sold his company to Google. Marcus came home a different person. He was sullen, quiet, and intensely critical of himself, and by extension, of our life. He kept looking at himself in the mirror, poking at his stomach. "I look like crap," he announced one night. "That guy, my age, and he looks like a movie star. I need to get serious. I need a total transformation." Eager to be the supportive, problem-solving girlfriend, I jumped at the chance to help. "Whatever you need, babe," I said, relieved to have a tangible problem to fix. "Let's get you the best. I'll take care of it." The next day, I signed him up for a membership at Elite Fitness, the most expensive, exclusive gym in the city. $180 a month, plus personal training fees, all auto-drafted from my bank account. I thought I was buying him confidence. I had no idea I was paying for the weapon that would be used to destroy me. A week later, he came home from his first session, buzzing with an energy I hadn't seen in months. "You'll never guess who I ran into," he said, his eyes gleaming. "Vanessa. Your stepsister. She's like a superstar trainer there. Everyone wants to train with her. She said she'd cut me a deal and train me personally." A small, cold knot formed in my stomach. "Vanessa?" I asked. "I didn't know you two were that close." "We're not," he said quickly, a little too quickly. "It was just a coincidence. It's perfect, right? Keeping it in the family." He laughed. I forced a smile. But the cold knot remained. The storm gathered so slowly at first, I almost didn't notice the change in the atmospheric pressure of my own home. The training sessions, initially scheduled for 3 days a week, quickly became 5. Then they started creeping later and later into the evening. He'd stumble in at 10, sometimes 11 p.m., exhausted and euphoric, smelling of sweat and a cloyingly sweet perfume that was definitely not mine. "It was an intense stretching session," he'd say, his eyes avoiding mine as he headed for the shower. "Vanessa is a beast. She's really pushing my limits." The expenses piled up at an alarming rate. $300 on a basket of protein powders and exotic supplements from a brand Vanessa recommended. $500 on new designer workout gear because, as Marcus explained, you have to look the part to feel the part. $1,000 on a high-tech cardio machine for the apartment so he could do extra sessions on his off days. My money, my credit card. I was funding his transformation, and he was transforming into a complete stranger right before my eyes. My friends and family saw it. My sister, Jessica, who never trusted Vanessa, called me in a panic one afternoon. I saw Vanessa at the mall," she said, her voice tight with anger. She was with her friends, and I overheard her talking about Marcus. She was laughing, saying how she had him wrapped around her little finger and how he'd do anything she said. It was disgusting. "Please, you have to be careful." I confronted Marcus that night. I was calm, I was rational. I told him what Jessica had heard. His reaction was explosive. "Are you serious?" he yelled, his face turning red. "You're going to listen to your jealous little sister over me? I'm finally doing something for myself, finally getting my confidence back, and you're trying to sabotage it. This is what you always do, Emily. You can't stand to see me happy." He stormed out, slamming the door, leaving me standing in the kitchen, shaking, my own valid concerns twisted into a weapon and used against me. The gaslighting was so effective, I found myself wondering if I was the one in the wrong. The final, brutal clue came at our last family dinner together. It was for my stepfather Richard's birthday. The whole family was gathered at a stuffy, overpriced steakhouse he loved. I was trying my best to be pleasant, to maintain the facade of a happy family. Throughout the dinner, Vanessa was insufferable. She kept talking about her star client, Marcus, and his incredible physical progress. At one point, she reached across the table and squeezed his bicep, letting her hand linger for far too long. "All my hard work is paying off," she purred, looking directly at me. I felt a hot flush of humiliation crawl up my neck. I looked at my mom, who gave me a small, worried shake of her head. I looked at Richard, who was beaming at them like a proud father. "You two make a great team," he boomed. As she pulled her hand back, something glinted under the restaurant lights. It was a delicate silver necklace with a small, infinity loop charm. My breath caught in my throat. It was a gift from my grandmother, who had passed away 2 years prior. It was my most treasured possession. I thought I had lost it weeks ago. I had torn my apartment apart looking for it. And there it was. Around my stepsister's neck. Our eyes met across the table. There was no pretense, no denial. Just a tiny, triumphant smirk that played on her lips. She knew that I knew. She put a hand to her chest, a deliberately casual gesture, drawing my attention to the stolen piece of my life she was wearing so brazenly. It was a declaration of war. It was a power play. She was telling me, without words, I can take anything I want from you. Even this. In that moment, I didn't need proof of the affair. I didn't need to catch them in the act. I knew. I knew my boyfriend was sleeping with my stepsister. I knew they were enjoying making a fool of me. And I knew it had to end. My only question was how. The night of the cancelled meeting, as I drove home, my mind was a whirlwind. I wasn't going home to surprise him anymore. I was going home to end a chapter of my life. I parked my car in my designated spot in the building's garage and just sat there for a full 10 minutes, the engine off, the silence of the concrete tomb pressing in on me. I was trying to piece together the timeline. How long had this been going on? How many lies had I swallowed? How much of my life, my money, my love had I wasted? Then, a flicker of a memory, like a corrupted file in my brain. A weird email I'd gotten a few weeks back. It had been buried in a sea of work notifications and spam. I'd glanced at the sender, DM, and a subject line that said regarding Vanessa, and I'd dismissed it as junk, dragging it to the trash folder without a second thought. Why would a stranger be emailing me about Vanessa? On a gut instinct I still can't explain, I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling as I opened my mail app. I navigated to the trash folder, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I scrolled down, past deleted marketing emails and old receipts. And there it was. I clicked it open. The message was short, cryptic, and terrifying. My name is David Morrison. I am, or was, Vanessa's husband. She is not who you think she is. She did this to my wife before me. She targets people. Check her company's financials. Be careful. My blood ran cold. She did this before. She targets people. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a premeditated attack. The message gave my anger a new, sharper edge. I wasn't just a woman who had been cheated on. I was a woman who had been hunted. I put the car in park, took a deep, shuddering breath, and walked toward the elevator. I was no longer a heartbroken girlfriend walking home to a confrontation. I was an engineer walking into a system that was critically flawed, and I was about to debug the hell out of it. When I opened that front door, I was already armed with information. I was already at war. So when I saw them, tangled together on my couch, it wasn't just a betrayal of love. It was a confirmation of a calculated, predatory deception. After the TV screen cracked and they were scrambling naked and humiliated in the hallway, my first instinct wasn't to shatter into a million pieces. It was to build a fortress. After slamming the door on their public humiliation, I stood in the silence of my ruined apartment. The adrenaline was a high-pitched ringing in my ears, but my mind was eerily calm. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I walked over to my desk, sat down in the ergonomic chair I'd bought for my long hours of coding, and went to work. Marcus thought he was clever. He was a smooth-talking marketer who thought the world ran on charm and deception. But he was an amateur messing with a professional systems architect. He had connected all his devices, his phone, his tablet, his laptop, to my home network. My network. He'd even complained a few months ago that he didn't know how to set up his cloud backups properly. "You're so smart with this stuff, babe, can you just handle it?" he'd asked. He had no idea that in his laziness, he had given me the master keys to his entire digital life. I didn't need his passwords. I had root access to everything. Within minutes, I was in. I bypassed his flimsy security protocols and started a full data extraction. The text messages were the first thing I found, a 4-month-long chronicle of their sordid affair. They were graphic, sickening. They mocked me, calling me the workhorse and the ATM. They'd done it in my bed while I was on a business trip. They'd done it in his car, the car I paid the insurance on. He'd used the emergency credit card I gave him, my card, to pay for lavish hotel rooms for their afternoon trysts, booking them under a fake name. The rage burned, but it was a cold, focused fire now. I meticulously saved every message, every timestamp. This was the evidence for the restraining order. But I kept digging. I'm an engineer. I'm trained to look for patterns, for anomalies in the system. And I found one. It wasn't in the texts. It was buried deep in his financial folders, in a subdirectory he'd cleverly mislabeled old college projects. Tucked away were scanned documents, complex spreadsheets, and a series of invoices that made my blood run cold. And that's when the true, horrifying picture came into focus. It wasn't just an affair. It was a sophisticated, criminal enterprise. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at an invoice, sent from a company called Elite Fitness Physical Therapy to Marcus's health insurance provider. The claim was for a 12-week course of treatment for a torn rotator cuff. A torn rotator cuff he never had. I cross-referenced the dates with our shared calendar. On one of the alleged physical therapy dates, we had been in the Poconos for a weekend getaway. I scrolled further. Another claim for chronic lumbar strain. Another for post-trauma rehabilitative services. They were all signed off by a supervising physician I'd never heard of. The total billed to his insurance was over $15,000. Then I found the master spreadsheet. My heart hammered against my ribs. It listed names, dozens of them, all male clients at Elite Fitness. Next to each name were their insurance details, their social security numbers, their dates of birth. And in the final columns, payout amounts. Tens of thousands of dollars. Hundreds of thousands. It was a ledger of their crimes. The affair wasn't the goal. The affair was the tool. It was the entry point. Vanessa hadn't just seduced my boyfriend. She had profiled him. An insecure man with a stable, high-earning girlfriend who had a premium health insurance plan. She used the intimacy of the relationship to gain his trust, to get access to his personal information, his signature, his consent forms. And then, she and her cousin, Brad Morrison, the manager at Elite Fitness, used that information to commit massive, systematic insurance fraud. The ground fell away from beneath me. This wasn't a messy breakup anymore. This was a federal crime. My personal heartbreak had just intersected with a multi-million-dollar felony. The stakes had just been raised from my dignity to their freedom. And I was holding all the cards, all the data, all the proof. I saved everything to a triple encrypted external hard drive, made 2 backups, and wiped the source. My living room was a crime scene, and I had just collected all the evidence. The next 24 hours were a blur of cold, calculated, and decisive action. I didn't sleep. I drank black coffee and moved with the focused energy of a general preparing for battle. At 7 a.m., I had a locksmith at my door, changing every lock. At 8 a.m., I had a junk removal service hauling away the couch, the coffee table, and the broken TV. I wanted no trace of them left in my home. I packed every single thing Marcus owned, every shirt, every shoe, every stupid gadget, into black trash bags and left them in the building's industrial dumpster. At 9 a.m., I was on the phone with my lawyer. not a divorce lawyer. I found a former federal prosecutor who had started his own firm specializing in financial crime and racketeering cases. I explained the situation calmly, factually. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Miss Foster," he finally said, his voice tinged with awe, "you may have just handed me the biggest case of my career." By noon that day, we had filed for an emergency temporary restraining order against both Marcus and Vanessa, citing stalking, harassment, and the evidence of criminal activity. The backlash was immediate and vicious. My stepfather, Richard, showed up at my door that evening, pounding on it, his face purple with rage. "How could you do this?" he screamed through the solid wood. "You assaulted them. You humiliated Vanessa. She could have been seriously hurt. You've always been jealous of her success, and now you're trying to ruin her life." I didn't even open the door. I spoke through the peephole, my voice as cold and hard as steel. "Get off my property, Richard," I said, "before I add you to the restraining order for harassment." He stood there, sputtering, for another minute before finally storming off. The real fear set in 2 days later. I was walking to my car in my office parking garage after a long day at work. It was late, and the garage was mostly empty, the air thick with the smell of concrete and exhaust fumes. Suddenly, Marcus stepped out from behind a concrete pillar, blocking my way. He had violated the restraining order without a second thought. His face wasn't apologetic or sad. It was ugly, twisted with a desperate rage. "You have no idea who you're messing with, Emily," he hissed, taking a step closer. The smell of stale alcohol wafted off him. "You think you're so smart with your little computer tricks? Drop this. Drop the lawsuit, drop the police report. Drop it all, now. Or I swear to God, I will ruin you. I'll tell the police you attacked me unprovoked. I'll tell your company you've been stealing corporate secrets. I'll make sure you lose your job, your reputation, everything." I felt a genuine spike of primal fear. He was bigger than me, and he was cornered. At the same time, a thick envelope arrived at my office via courier. It was a cease and desist letter from a high-powered, notoriously aggressive law firm representing elite fitness. It was filled with legal jargon, accusing me of defamation, tortious interference with business, and threatening a multi-million-dollar countersuit. For one terrifying moment, I felt the weight of it all crushing me. It was me, one woman, against a corporation, against two criminals who had nothing left to lose. I sat in my car, the threatening letter in my lap, and I finally cried. Not for the loss of the relationship, but from the sheer, overwhelming pressure of the fight I had started. I felt small and very, very alone. That night, sitting in my silent, half-empty apartment, I almost gave up. The fight felt too big, the enemies too powerful. My own lawyer had warned me, "They will try to bury you in legal fees. They will try to break you. Are you sure you're ready for this?" I wasn't sure of anything anymore. Then, my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Is this Emily Foster?" a man's voice asked. It was quiet, hesitant, and heavy with a weariness I recognized. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "My name is David Morrison," he said. I was Vanessa's husband. I'm the DM who sent you that email." I sank into a chair, my legs suddenly weak. "I saw the video of what happened in your hallway," he continued, his voice filled with a weary sadness. "It's gone viral in a few local community groups. She's done this before, Emily. Many times. I've been quietly collecting evidence for years, trying to build a case for my divorce, trying to prove she was unfit to have custody of our son. I have documents. I have names of other women. I have a box full of proof. I think it's time we talked." And just like that, the crushing weight lifted. I wasn't alone anymore. I had an ally. The hunter had just become the hunted. The year that followed was the hardest, most draining, and most empowering of my life. There was no single, dramatic courtroom showdown like you see in the movies. The war was a grueling campaign fought in sterile lawyers' offices, during 10-hour depositions under fluorescent lights, and through mountains of digital and paper evidence. David and I became an unlikely but formidable team. His box of meticulously organized paper documents, old receipts, suspicious bank statements, sworn affidavits from other women Vanessa had targeted, combined with the terabytes of irrefutable data I had extracted from the cloud, created an ironclad case. We found 5 other men who had been similarly seduced and defrauded by Vanessa. They were hesitant to come forward at first, ashamed and afraid. But seeing that I, a woman, was willing to lead the charge gave them the courage. Together, we filed a class-action civil suit against Elite Fitness and its parent company. My role in this war was unique. I wasn't just the lead plaintiff and star witness. In those long meetings with our legal team, I was the expert. I was the one on the whiteboard, drawing out network diagrams, explaining the digital forensics, tracing the IP addresses, and showing exactly how the money laundering and insurance fraud was committed. I had found my voice, and it was backed by undeniable, logical proof. I watched as seasoned lawyers listen to me, a 29-year-old software engineer, with rapt attention. The same intelligence that Marcus had belittled was now the weapon that was going to bring his world crashing down. The first real crack in their fortress came from Veronica Chen, a tenacious investigative reporter for the city's main newspaper. Tipped off by our lawyer, she didn't just write one story, she launched a whole investigative series titled Predators at the Gym, Sex, Lies, and Insurance Fraud at Elite Fitness. The story exploded. The public outrage was immense. With the clear evidence of wire fraud crossing state lines that I had provided, the FBI, which had been quietly monitoring the situation, officially launched a federal investigation. The end came not with a bang, but with a series of quiet, devastating surrenders. Facing federal charges and a PR nightmare, Elite Fitness's parent company folded. They settled our civil suit out of court to avoid a catastrophic public trial. The check they wrote was for a sum that changed all of our lives. It was never about the money, but the number, with its 7 figures, was a clear admission of guilt. It was validation. Vanessa and Brad, the masterminds, were indicted by a federal grand jury on charges of conspiracy, wire fraud, and money laundering. Vanessa, seeing the mountain of evidence against her and facing the prospect of a decade in prison, took a plea deal. She was sentenced to 36 months in a minimum security federal prison. Brad, who was less cooperative, went to trial, lost, and got 5 years. And Marcus? He did what cowards do. He turned on them to save his own skin. He testified for the prosecution, painting himself as a naive victim of Vanessa's manipulations. The judge didn't fully buy it. He got 2 years of probation, a permanent felony record that made him unemployable in his field, and a court order to pay restitution for the rest of his miserable life. The last I heard, he was 28 years old, living in his parents' basement in Ohio. A few months ago, I got an email from my mom. It was a short, simple message. She had finally done it. She had filed for divorce from Richard. "You gave me the courage," she wrote. "You showed me that we don't have to accept the unacceptable. Thank you for showing me what strength looks like. My sister Jessica and I are closer than ever. We are each other's staunchest defenders." I moved out of that apartment. I couldn't stand the memories. I used my share of the settlement to make a down payment on a beautiful condo in a new part of the city, one with a view of the skyline. But I didn't stop there. I took the rest of the money, my severance from a job I no longer needed, and the skills I had honed in my own fight, and I started my own company. It's a cybersecurity firm. We're not a giant corporation, we're a small, dedicated team. Our mission is to help ordinary people and small businesses protect themselves from the kind of digital exploitation and financial fraud that almost broke me. I'm pitching to our first round of venture capital investors next week. It's terrifying and exhilarating. I'm not just an employee anymore. I'm a founder. I'm a CEO. I took the worst experience of my life, the moment of my deepest humiliation, and I built something new and powerful from the ashes. The other day, I was setting up my new work laptop. When it asked me to choose a desktop background, I didn't pick a scenic landscape or a picture of family. I just opened a simple text editor and wrote a single, elegant line of code. It's a complex algorithm I designed for our flagship security product. It's my code. It's a reminder. They tried to delete my life, so I rewrote the whole program. And this version is faster, smarter, and impossible to hack. Thank you for listening to my story. It was a long and difficult journey, but I came out stronger on the other side. My question for you is, have you ever had to completely rewrite the script of your own life after a betrayal? Let me know in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please give this video a like and subscribe for more. You're not alone.